Sounds good. Sounds good. Sounds good.
Hello, and thank you for watching Once an Orphan. I'm Jasmine. Joining me today is a fellow adoptee, also an adoptive mom, and an author who, along with her son, co wrote Loving Desmond. Thank you so much for joining me today, Miss Sarah. How are you?
I Good, Jasmine. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk and tell my story and a little bit of my truth that is kind of getting out there now. This book as
Uh,
well, so I appreciate.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for just joining me because as an adoptee, we know what the emotions are that we carry. And so often it's very hard for us to get to this point where we can transparently share our stories. So before we talk about Desmond, who's your adopted son,
Hmm.
I want to start with your story, Miss Sarah. You are also an adoptee.
I am, and I work as a social worker as well. So sometimes people ask how long I've worked in adoption, and I usually say all my life because
Right.
literally I was born to, and what I guess the story I was told is I was born in the early 60s to an unwed mother. And of course, back then that was a big, horrors. You're a single mother, at least as far as the culture. So I always knew I was adopted. So there was no big reveal. I was adopted into a same race family after spending some time in foster care. I was raised, with the old, we chose you, you're special. And now we know those are not necessarily really helpful things to
Right.
tell your
Right.
child, but definitely always knew I was different. Um, as I was working on the book, and we'll talk more about that later, but there are things I can remember growing up, right? I when there was another little girl in our class that was adopted, and her name was also Sarah, we were expected to be best friends. Like, look, there's this huge connection, and so there was always that little feeling of being different growing up. I remember honestly making up stories during show and tell about my early beginnings. I don't know, just
Right.
whatever it was. Kids were curious. I was curious, and I didn't exactly know. Not that my parents were hiding anything, but they really didn't know anything. It was very closed adoption. Um, I always felt, though, I would say good about it. I mean, I didn't have like a lot of grief about it at that time. I felt good. I think what really brought up a lot of questions for me was after I married, and my first husband and I went through the infertility process, right? And then I really started to have questions like, who am I if I don't have a biological child? I just sort of felt beamed down to earth, like from outer space. Like, I don't have
Mhm.
anybody before me, I don't have anybody after me.
Yeah.
Who am I anyway? So my husband and I did make the decision to adopt. Um, Really, it was a very natural. I think I had always planned on adopting, and he knew that before we got married. I think the original course was we'll have some biological kids and adopt one or two kids, and it turned out very differently.
Right.
We adopted all of our
Right.
kids. Never just really never went back to the fertility question once we started adopting. Now we know adoption doesn't like cure fertility issues and help it, but no, the goal was to become a parent. It really was, not to be biological A plus B equals C. So once we made that decision, we were super happy. But after we had our first daughter, that's when I really began searching in earnest for my biological mother. And at the time, I did keep it a secret from my parents. Um, like I said, it was a closed adoption. My adoptive mother made it very clear to me that was her worst fear, was for me to find my biological parents. And she always had a lot of anxiety. She would share this weird sort of fantasy she had that she'd be ironing clothes and the doorbell would ring and my biological mother would be there and open the door and say, "That's my child."
Wow.
This big dramatic soap opera thing. So
Right.
this is her super big fear, right? So I decided not to tell them during the switch process because I didn't want to cause her any more anxiety. I didn't know what I was going to find.
Yeah.
Am I going to find somebody that's homeless that now I have an obligation to help them?
Right.
Everything's going through my mind. I just don't know. I did use back then, the internet was just starting to be a thing. And so this is probably the early 1990s. And I used a search group. And then that group had a confidential intermediary that worked with the court. So, we got my non-identifying adoption information. The confidential intermediary, believed that she could share initials. She wouldn't give
Right.
names, but she felt like that was still confidential, knowing people's
Right.
initials. So putting together her information plus the information from my non-identifying adoptee information, I actually located my birth mom. And I remember sitting in that county courthouse because I knew she had gotten married about a month after she had me, and I found those initials. And I was literally remember thinking, I got you, I found you.
Wow.
And I was just like, so from there, I worked with groups. She said, well, what she wanted to do was call her. And she called my birth mom. And with the phone call, what she told me was my birth mom evidently just kept saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, and kind of hung up the phone. So the confidential intermediary said, well, that really wasn't a decline, because if my mom would have said, no, I don't want to hear anything, that's where the process would have stopped. But she said, because she said, I don't know, the CI said I could write her a letter. So I wrote her this, what I thought was a lovely letter, mailed it off to her, with my whole heart there on that paper, no response. So I waited, nothing. She said, well, I will mail one more letter for you. And this letter, I don't want to say it was a little more pointed, but it was. I kind of said, I totally understand if you don't want to be found. I totally respect that. It's your decision. But I hope you understand now I'm going to start the search for my biological father and my siblings. And boom, I got a letter back 2 days later. So
Wow.
she wrote back. It was a lovely letter. She agreed to meet me. She made it very, very clear that the relationship would not continue beyond that lunch meeting. So we set up a lunch meeting at an area restaurant, and I drove. I had one child at that point, and she was probably 18 months old. So I brought my child, I brought me, went and walked. I remember walking up to the restaurant door, and out she barreled out of those doors, just weeping. And she gave me the biggest hug. We had the best lunch. She, she cried. She told me, she always wanted to meet me. She always thought of me. She loved me. She said all of the right things. But she told me she did not know who my biological father was. She said I had several siblings. She had quite a few kids. She showed me some pictures, but honestly, I did not see that we really looked that much alike. So, but she did say things that didn't really jive with not knowing my birth father. She talked about how naive she was in the early 60s, how she and her friends thought if they sat on a boy's lap during a school dance, they would get pregnant. So I'm kind of like, we got the super naive teen, and she was 19 when she had me. She was like a nursing student. And then we have this, I don't know, like I knew she wasn't quite frankly sleeping around or didn't, you know what I mean? That just didn't jive with who she's telling me she was in high school. But after meeting her, honestly, I went into quite a depression, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
I felt like I never felt bad about being adopted before. But after meeting her, and it felt like rejection. It felt like you met me and you still don't want to know me. And I was kind of disappointed she couldn't be strong enough to tell the other kid. Like, I had a lot of feelings going into this judgment, but really the way I described it is like I went through a double grief. Like, I really didn't have grief before, but then it was like double
So you
after I
felt like
met.
you lost her early in life, and then
Yes,
again, of course, when you
yes,
met
and then
her.
it was, but then it was like personal because you met
Yes.
me and you're rejecting me. So it really it hurt. I got some help. I moved through it, went on with life. There were a few little times where I would send her maybe it was a little passive aggressive. I'd send her a family Christmas card unsigned. Like we did the picture Christmas card so she could kind of see my family's growing, and
Right.
I'd send little things like that off. But I think I talked to her once after I had met her. My brother that's right under me was going into the first Desert Storm at the time, and so I was worried about him. I wanted to make sure he was okay. So we had a little phone call, and during that phone call, which was maybe 2, 3 years after we had met, she told me her whole life had changed. She had lost weight. She had cut her hair. She went back to nursing school to finish. She divorced her husband. Like, I could almost see that for her when we met was very cathartic for her. Like, I went into a depression, but she kind of
Right.
blossomed. Like she
Yeah.
she
Mm.
she'd been basically sort of barefoot and pregnant, and the mom of all these kids, and after she met, she kind of, you know, started to focus on herself and love herself. Um, so that was good. Life went on. Um, Personally, I was widowed, so I was a single mom, and decided to become a social worker because I love social work, adoption, and everything. And one of my jobs was recruiting, so I would do a lot of speaking, public speaking, and I was speaking actually at a small country church, and about the great need for families for especially teens in foster care. And there was another gentleman there, and I've never met him before. He happened to, of course, he corners me after the service, and he says, "You said you're adopted. Did you ever find your family?" And I gave him a little, shortened version of what I just said here. And he
Right.
said, "Well, I used that same search group to find my biological family." And he looked at me and said, "You need to find your siblings." And I said, "Well, out of respect for my birth mom, I'm not going to search. I'm going to, I need to honor and respect her wishes." And he looked at me very pointedly. He said, "Sarah, it's been 20 years. She's not going to tell them." And then, and I'm like, "Oh, you are kind of right."
Right.
But I still wasn't really going to move. But then the man took my business card, and then he called me like it was a campaign. Like, every
Mhm.
other day he's calling me, "Sarah, have you called the group yet? Have you called the AIM group yet? Have you?" And honestly, to finally shut him up, because I kept saying no, no, and he's like, "You got to do this. You got to do this."
Yeah.
So went to social media, went to Facebook,
Yep.
searched for their last names because I knew their first last name, and I just searched for the last name, picked probably 8 people at random, sent a Facebook message. "Are you by any chance, related to," just say their name, "John and Joanne Gleason?"
Mhm.
And I got a bunch of people that said no. And then I got a, "Yes, I am. Why do you ask?" And I
Mm.
was like, "Oh, now I don't know what to," because I really wasn't trying to find him. I mean, I
Right.
literally
Right.
was doing
So
this
how
to
do you
shut the
respond to
man
that?
up. I was like, "I'm so sorry to do this on Facebook. I think I may be your older sister," and she just, she was shocked. And she says, I have to talk to my mom about this.
Mm.
She said, she friended me, and she said, "You look like a lovely person, and I can respect you, but I don't know, you know." And I'll never forget, she signed her message "in due time." So
Mm.
I was thinking, okay, maybe in 6 months I'll hear
Right.
something.
Right. Whenever.
Yeah, it went. Yeah, I'm like, okay, I waited 20 years. Literally, the next time I logged in, the next night, I have like 35 ads. People, like, everybody. And when back then people could message and you would pop in and be like,
Yeah.
"Hi, Aunt Sarah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
Levi. I do that." And I'm like, "Who are you?" I mean, literally
Really.
no clue. I was just blown away. I remember
Mm.
I was supposed to go on a date with my husband and with some friends, and I'm like, I don't know what to do. My Facebook was blowing up,
Right.
and I'm reading and I'm looking, and I have all these siblings, and I remember reading I got onto one of my brother's pages, and I could read one of the comments from one of his friends, because my siblings are like, holy crap, we have an older sister. I mean, they did not know what to do. They were just,
Yeah, I
this is
mean, what do you do?
crazy, crazy. Um, I should probably circle around and say that my sister did write me. She said, I talked to mom. She admitted she had you. Um, but she's really scared. She doesn't know what to do. So all this stuff is blowing up. But I looked at my brother's page, and one of his friends said, same mom and dad. And my brother said yes. So now I know these are full siblings.
Wow.
And I found out I was the oldest of 10 siblings, full siblings, all of them.
That's a big family.
It's a
That's a big
big
family.
family. I went from unknown birth father.
Yeah.
And that was my first thing, because my adopted father had died about 5 years earlier. And he was a wonderful man. And so I just was like, oh my God, I have a dad. I have a dad.
What
I couldn't believe it.
that had to be overwhelming,
Yeah.
completely overwhelming. I mean, not just for you, but for the entire family, for all of your
Oh my
siblings,
gosh. Yes.
for your biological mother, even for your adoptive mother. I mean, and to
Yes.
know that you were the oldest of 10, you're
Mm-hmm.
now dealing with the emotions that you have,
Yeah.
and then the emotions of your siblings. Some likely happy, some
Mm-hmm.
confused, and then you
Yeah.
have to deal with your biological mother. Do you think
Mm-hmm.
she was just embarrassed or afraid to tell your
Yes.
siblings, like, hey, but yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that you think that had a lot to do with
Yeah,
it?
for sure. For sure. I think it was her worst nightmare that I found her the first time. I really do. I think it was like a nuclear bomb in her life. I think she was terrified, because I came to find out later my biological father knew she was pregnant, but when she had me, she told everybody the baby didn't make it. She told everybody the baby died. She had me like at a single mother's home. So obviously, that's the quickest way to make this scary secret go away. They picked her up. They knew, like, they picked her up the next day. I think I was born in a Salvation Army, home for unwed mothers. And they picked her up. Her family picked her up, and she said, "Oh, the baby didn't make it." And nobody ever said another word. It was kind of like, well, dodge that bullet. Yeah, it's in
That
the early '60s, and
that's
on
so
my slant.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's so crazy to know that
Mm-hmm.
a child can be separated from their mom
Mm-hmm.
because the mom and dad are not married.
Right.
And I get
Right.
the traditional way. We all
Oh my
know
goodness.
the traditional
Yeah.
way, but to separate a family because of something like that, it's
Yeah.
that's a heavy emotion to carry.
I know.
So when you go back to your childhood and you say, "I've always felt different. I always knew that I was different." What was it that made you feel like you were different? What did you feel as a child?
You know what? That's a really great question. I feel like ultimately it's this label you wear, right? You're adopted. You're special. You knew when you're old enough to find out, you're not biological. Back then they were matching families. I don't think I look
Right,
anything like my adopted family, but they were trying to match babies for
right.
families back then, at least with the Caucasian group. And so it was just like I said, there was just always that feeling, that knowledge, that, like I said, I don't know what, my parents must have done something right, because I didn't feel bad about it. I know a lot of adoptees feel bad. I didn't necessarily. I mean, there were some times. I share actually a story in my book about. I think I was in seventh grade. It's probably one of the times I felt the worst. I remember working on our bike with my best friend, and she looks at me and she said, Sarah, I found out what the word bastard means. And I found out that you are a bastard. You are the definition of a bastard. And I don't think I ever knew what that word meant. I don't,
What?
you know what I mean? And then she paddles away, and I just remember following her thinking, am I a swear word? Am I a swear word? Like, who am I? And so these hurtful things, right? They
Right.
happen. I mean, it's just like, um, and I think there's just a lot of that, blood is thicker than water, um, rhetoric out there. And so there is that, you're like, it's,
I,
it's
I,
subtle. It's almost like that microaggression. That was a macroaggression, but the
right.
other stuff is kind of like, those microaggression things, like you're different,
I want
you're
I want to
different.
sit in that just for a minute,
Mm-hmm.
if we can. I want to sit in that because not only did you not know what the word meant, but even though you had already known you were adopted, then you hear the word bastard. Oh, you're a bastard. Almost said like in a way like, got you figured out, girl. You're a bastard. Gotta go. So now, not only are you aware that you are adopted, but now you have to find out, well, how am I a bastard?
Right.
That
It's not a good label. It's not, I mean, I can't paint
at
that as a
all.
happy
Right.
thing or
Right. Yeah.
a
So, I
feminine
mean,
look.
it's
It's
just,
my
and
life.
so you carry this as a seventh grader.
Yes.
Oh my God. And your friend probably did not even think anything about it. Kind of like, hey, I'm 12
It
years
was like
old.
she
I'm
was
not saying anything
excited. She
mean.
was excited to put that together. Like, I heard that word and the definition. I know that's you. I know somebody who's that. It's kind of, she was
Right.
like excited. And
Right.
I
So
was
now,
devastated.
so now you continue life as, oh, okay, well, I'm a bastard because I'm adopted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's heavy.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And, I think obviously, a lot of the other normal things children who are adopted and adoptees go through, going to the doctors and trying to get the medical. And I
Yeah.
can remember, oh, can you give me, the medical history? And I would start, even as young women, start to give the history of my adoptive family.
Yeah.
And then go, oh, wait, that's my adoptive family. And then they're like, oh, never mind. And they cross it out
Right.
and write adopted in big
Right.
letters on your chart, back when
Yeah.
you had paper charts.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah. She doesn't know, and then it's
yeah,
just,
what?
wow.
It's just that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
So, there was, like I said, I'm sure there were things, I think like most adoptees, I would have fantasies about meeting my biological parents. That certainly happened. And in my fantasies, I would always be meeting them. They would be driving a limo. You know, it was
Right.
always like a famous person or something, which was
Right.
not
I
the
mean, but
case, but it was like, yeah, and
yeah.
that might have been some of the leavings of the year special. That parenting thing that we shouldn't do. But so yeah, it was good. But finding out I have this big family. I'm gonna circle just to the end of that story and finding out that my biological dad grieved me. He grieved when he heard I died, and so I was literally like the dead rising for him. I remember him seeing me the first
Mhm.
time and just this confusion looking on his
Yeah.
face. And I think he didn't really know if I was there to take money. What was I there? I mean, I think his brain was trying to put all of this together. So, um, I will say that, and I'm sure my bio mom was upset because her secret was out, and it wasn't her choice to let it out. And it didn't come out maybe how she wanted it to, but she actually handled it with a lot of grace. The family, and she very much with her personality. She's kind of like, I call it the Ellis Island personality. Bring me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses. Like she was
Right.
Mama Joe. She was all the kids' friends' mom. She just took everybody in. So she did kind of embrace me that way, and my siblings did as well very
Mhm.
much. I always knew there was somebody missing. I always wished I had an older sister. I always,
Wow.
so they really were very special and dear, and they still are.
Mm.
But yeah, like you kind of mentioned, my adoptive mom, that was a lot for her
Yeah.
to
I
handle.
can only imagine because um, your adoptive mom, I think I saw something on Instagram. Did you have a brother?
Yes, I had one. I had one. So it's a very small adoptive family. They had one biological son.
Mhm.
He was 5 years older than me, and then they adopted me. They sort of had they call secondary infertility. Adopted me. I'm like the first person adopted in the family. Nobody, no, you know what I mean?
Right.
Certainly not a very culturally attuned to adoption family at all. So I'm sure
Mm.
there was that piece of it too that kind of added to the differentness, maybe. But I just felt always loved. I felt cherished. And I'm really lucky and happy and blessed about that. But
Yeah.
there were
And I
still
mean,
losses. Hmm.
so it sounds like you had a very good adoption
I
experience.
did, I did,
Yeah.
and
Good.
I
I
know
mean,
not everybody does.
same.
Not
Right.
everybody does. But
So many don't.
yes,
And that's the thing. So many don't. And because of that, they don't know how to channel that energy. I mean, it can either be positive, negative,
oh yeah,
but either way,
hmm
they don't know how to direct that. And so as a result, especially if you don't get the proper mental
yes,
health care and things, and it becomes problematic because it becomes generational.
yeah.
And that's the unfortunate part of it. And so when you talk about your adoptive mom, how do you think, I mean, what did you tell her when you sit down and you
I
say,
did. I did finally tell her, and I told her when I found her the original time. So I just didn't tell her during the process, which was very emotional. The search process is anybody that has searched. I think you're lying if you say it's not emotional. It's very emotional. It's very scary. It's very. What if I'm
yeah,
rejected? What if they,
yeah, all of that.
all the things.
Yep.
Um, so I did tell her after, and I think she was like, okay, she wasn't negative about it, but she made it clear she didn't really want to hear anything about that side of the
Mm,
family. And same thing when I found all of my siblings, and I was so excited, and I wanted to tell her all these stories, and I really don't want to hear about that. I think it
mm,
was she really took that. I think love divides. Like if I and I always take the love expands. Like the more love, the better. Like I think there's room for bio, adoptive. I think as
yeah.
long as relationships can be healthy, I think it's limitless.
Why do
And
you Why do you think, Miss Sarah, why do you think adoptive parents have that emotion where they just don't want to hear about it? Because for the life of me, I don't get it. My adoptive mom, she was like, you need to know, find them, find them, find them, find them. I think my dad likely had a different, feeling.
mhm,
But I wonder, why do you think adoptive parents have that feeling? I don't get it.
it's fear. I think it's just fear. I think it's fear that their child is going to prefer them, that that they will now be rejected because, again, that blood is thicker than water. And won't my
Mm,
child prefer um, and feel more comfortable, or whatever the idea or fantasy is? I really think it just comes to fear. It's just fear, and I try not to live in the fear place,
right.
but I get it. And my mom very much did. She had a lot of fear about
Well,
a lot of things,
right.
but
I want to say
for
to
sure.
the gentleman who pushed you to Sarah, you need to know, Sarah, find them. Sarah, it's been 20 years. How old were you when you met your biological mother?
The first time I was probably 28, 27,
Mm,
28. So I waited 20 years. I was in my mid 40s when I
mm,
found them again. And now I want to say I've known them almost 15 years. It's been 14 years since, and we are still, my sisters are my sisters, my brothers are my brothers,
I
and
love that.
yeah, and my bio mom, she did pass away in 2018, and that was very sad. But I do have,
So,
my biological dad, thankfully and prayerfully, he's still kicking, and,
so you did meet your biological father.
oh yeah, oh yes. Like I said,
All
he was
right, I'm
probably the
listening.
most.
I'm
Yeah,
listening.
yeah. So after that whole day where my literally Facebook blew up, I call it the day Facebook blew up. The next day I met with some of the siblings, a lot of the aunts and uncles. Oh my gosh, because I would have been the oldest grandchild on that side,
Yeah.
and so aunts and uncles came probably. Like half of them came, and we met at an area restaurant, and but not my mom and dad. And to be honest, my mom had gone into hiding when this happened. She went into hiding because my dad
Really?
was throwing chairs, and he was mad. He was angry. And honestly, obviously not expressing your anger that way is not okay, but you understand the anger. That choice was taken away from him.
Right.
She made that choice, never said a word to him,
Yeah.
and he had grieved me, and kind of how dare she. So they were really kind of fighting. They had already divorced, but they were mostly peaceful, but this was not a good thing. But by the next day, one of my nephews, my brother's Roman Catholic, and so his kids were being had first communion, and so I was invited to the first communion party,
Mhm.
and so that's when I met Dad, and when my mom was there, and all the siblings were there. Everybody was there, so it was a big deal. And I brought all my kids, which I have a wall
Mm.
full behind me, so it was a whole lot of people. and
To know that he
they got.
grieved you,
Mhm.
to know that he grieved you makes me feel like he was infuriated.
Oh yeah.
He had to have been livid to know after all these years, the child that I knew that I had, I was told that this child was deceased
Died. Yeah.
and I missed out on her entire life.
Yes. And he said it. He said, "I never would have placed you for adoption. I would have
Right.
never let that happen." So that was significant too. Um, my mom. I want to go back to my birth story a little bit because I found out more about that when she had me. She didn't. They had what they called twilight sleep back then. So you were almost like in this semi-conscious, almost like when you get your wisdom teeth out, kind of this.
Gotcha.
You're not fully under general anesthesia, obviously, but you're
Hmm.
not remembering. But she remembers very little about it, but she didn't even know if I was a boy or girl. That's how separated she was from her adoption plan. She had me, it was, it sounds really nasty, but it felt like she kind of had me like a bowel movement. Like she had me and moved on. That's how it felt like to me. And it's really a rough way to say it, but that's how I felt. Um, and she said that later on when she had to go to court back in Michigan and even up to recent days, you had to go to court later, some weeks later, to sign your rights away, basically. And she said the agency workers were like, we have to tell you, you have to know it was a girl, yeah.
Yeah.
And she's like, okay. And then they said, is there anything you want to request for the adoptive family? Any characteristics you want them to have? And she's like, no, I don't know. And they said, well, do you want her to have a Christian family? Because that was sort of a very Christian area, religious area. And she said, yeah, okay, kind of like whatever. And then she said, Sarah, later on, she said, when I was saved, Christian term saved, she said, I held on to that. I was so happy. I just pictured and prayed that you were in a Christian family. And she said, I was so glad I said that. I was so glad I said that. She said, but at the time it was whatever, she just sort of said it to make him happy. But
Mm.
she was so disconnected emotionally. I think she's so compartmentalized the
Wow.
process. So she never properly grieved.
Right.
She didn't have the mental health. And I wish I had a pencil to do this. She went in one time for prenatal care. She told me the story. She went in one time for prenatal care. And she said to the doctor, she sat on the little table and she says to the doctor, I think I might be pregnant. And he broke the pencil and threw it across the room. And she left the examining room crying. That was her prenatal care in 1963.
What?
That
So, I mean, she also carried some very heavy
she
emotions.
carried so, yes. And because I don't want her to sound like evil or cold. She
Right.
really wasn't. I think she was doing really the best she could in a really tricky situation, a really tough situation. Her own family life growing up had some trauma in it, and then this, it just, it was an unplanned pregnancy. It was, and like I said, it was a much bigger deal, obviously, back then. You can't even
Right.
imagine a doctor doing that now. They would lose their license. But back then,
Right.
he felt like he could do that. And that's,
Can you imagine? I mean, when we think of the changes from back then to 2024 and the amount of unwed babies, could you imagine what it would be like today if, I mean, almost every child born will be placed for adoption?
yeah, yes, yes,
I mean, I mean,
exactly.
really.
Really, right? Right?
Yeah. And it's just because when you think about the early 60s, if we're being honest, that wasn't long ago. It may sound like it was long ago to some, and I realize times have changed from then to now, but
Mm-hmm.
that was not a long time ago. And to know that just what a few, maybe 50 plus years, nearly 60 years ago, that was the story. Fast
Yeah,
forward to today,
yeah.
there's some 19-year-old in labor right now as we speak
Mm-hmm.
who's looking forward to being the best mom that she can be
Yeah,
with or without dad present.
yeah. And she's probably had baby showers, and she's had,
Right.
and knew what to
Absolutely.
expect
The
when she
gender
felt
reveal,
bleeding, and
all
yes,
of that. So then, after your experience, because you had a great adoption experience, you decide at some point, well, if I'm going to deal with infertility issues,
Hmm.
let me look into adopting a child.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so now we have Desmond.
exactly. So
So
yeah,
how did that come about?
so Desmond is, ironically, Desmond was my sixth child that I adopted. So we went through traditional. Well, you can kind of see some of the pictures of my kids. It's more than that up there, but we adopted our first daughter from South Korea. As
Mm,
an infant. We did domestic infant adoptions, and that story will take forever. There's special pieces. Some of them are what I call surprise adoptions. In between, they're like, "Oh,
yeah,
Sarah, where'd
right.
you and Doug?" Maybe okay. So, but it was always my heart, and I think I call it my adoptee heart. Maybe that's the wrong thing, but my adoptee heart really struggles with the idea of kids waiting for adoption.
Yeah,
And because the truth is some families are not safe, some are,
yeah,
some can be safe. We bring more
that's true.
supports. And this isn't the debate time for all of that, because I do believe
Right.
there are many situations in which a child could be maintained in their biological family if the proper supports were there, but unfortunately our system is not that well developed in a lot of places. So we have these kids waiting for adoption, right? So I always wanted to adopt an older child. That was probably where I wanted to start, but we ended up with infant adoption. But my heart was always to adopt older children. And when I was doing my master's degree, literally every paper I wrote was in some way about the terrible issues facing youth that age out of foster care at 18. Like, it
Yeah.
just kills me.
Yep.
So we were going through the adoption process. We actually had been studied to do an older child. We had done all of the training and got one of those surprise calls, like, "Oh, you have a home study and we have a child." So slid
Mm.
another infant in there. That was hard for me. It wasn't really, but so with Desmond, we wanted to be matched with a child around that age range, maybe
Yeah.
between 5 and 9, because the kids we wanted sort of under our older child at that time anyway. So Desmond was waiting in a what was called the Mayor Book, the Michigan Adoption Resource Exchange, and then it was a paper catalog. I hate to even say the word catalog, but that's exactly what it was, a waiting children catalog.
Yeah.
And we had inquired literally about kids all over the U.S., New Jersey, Texas, everywhere, with nobody calling us back, calling our workers back. And Desmond was the first one that the worker called us back. And because we were looking at all of our kids were transracially adopted. So we had an Asian daughter, a biracial daughter, 3 African American sons, and quite honestly, I didn't want to start adopting white children because I didn't want my kids who were non-white to say what was wrong with us. They're facing
Mm.
enough. I wanted them to be their own community, to feel good, to have, because I know they're already facing um, a lot more than kids who are
Mm.
adopted in the same race family. So we were intentionally trying not to, which I know sounds terrible, but um, back then that was my thought. And so Desmond's worker called us back, and she was the first one, and he was from the Detroit area, so we were, his worker. I said, "Why did you why did you call us back?" And she had gone to college in our area, and she knew there were many, many, many transracial adopted families in our area, which there are. And so she knew the area was more diverse than the sort of stereotypes back then of
Yeah.
West Michigan. So, we met Desmond, and the stories all in the book. I'm gonna hold up my little book and do a show
Yes.
and tell. This book
Absolutely.
just
Yes.
came
Yes. Yes.
out, called Loving Desmond, that
Yeah.
we have written together. So Desmond came to us, this amazing 5-year-old, full of promise and spirit, and more trauma than any child should have ever experienced by that age
I saw
in
that.
foster care.
Did he come to you when he was just 2.5 years old?
No, he was 5.
He
He
was
was
5. But
5.
how many homes had he been in at that point?
Honestly, he had a total of 8 homes,
That's
but
what I thought.
between 2.5 and 5, he had 6, which is just beyond the pale. I mean, I can't imagine, even in my life, if I had to leave my home and move 6 times in 2.5 years and leave my whole family behind, get a new family, leave my pets behind, community,
Absolutely.
new whatever. It was just
And
too much.
it's entirely too much. And
Yeah.
again, I just want us to sit in that for a minute because a 5-year-old had to leave the hands of his biological mother,
Yeah.
go through 8 homes in 5 years before finding his forever family.
Right.
8 homes. I'm 45 years old and I've never had 8 homes. my my adoptive mother still resides in the home that I was brought home to. So she's
Wow.
owned her home for 54 years, I believe this year will be. So
Mm.
home for me is
Yeah,
that
it is
address.
literally, it's a physical address, it's an
Right,
emotional address, it's all the addresses.
right.
Yeah.
So that will always be home. That's the only address that I will ever reference as
Hmm.
home
Hmm.
outside of leaving the state and what have you. So to think about a 5-year-old having
Yeah.
8 homes, you get used to this family, this routine for a short while. Oh, we got to take Desmond. He's now moved to another
Right.
home, different faces, different routine. And for a child to go through that 8 times,
Yeah.
it makes me wonder. And this is why I talk about why the system is flawed. And as a social worker, and you can correct me.
Yeah.
You can say if whether it's the system or not, because how does 8 homes for a 5-year-old? That's
I
insane.
know. It's crazy. There were definitely reunification attempts in there. His mom, unfortunately, never had really. She had him. It was probably more similar to my bio mom story. Like I remember reading his hospital records, and this is in the book, and with permission of Desmond, so I'm sharing things that he's
Yeah.
agreed could be shared. But there's a little note from the nurse. We attempted to teach baby care, and she said, I don't need to know that. His dad will be handling all that. So he went home with bio dad, and very quickly, I think as a 6-month-old, came into foster care. The first time it was sort of a gangland situation, and Desmond was removed at 6 months. He had a really good foster mom. I could tell by reading his records, his first foster mama loved him, and she brought him to Disney World. The cute stories about Desmond's babyhood were with her. Um, I feel like she might have gotten sick, went to another foster home. Um, the mom and dad, both of them, and again, sometimes kids need to be available for adoption. I'm going to say this, and this was the case. Both of them showed up for 3 out of 36 scheduled visits with him. That means 36 times a foster mom got him dressed. Let's meet mommy, let's meet daddy, and nobody showed. 33 times out of 36. And the times they did show, they were very disengaged. Desmond was, in fact, the judge was just about to um, terminate dad's parental rights because the parenting plan goals were not met. I don't know if mom ever had parenting plan goals. I honestly, I probably need to read through that and see if I can find that out. But dad didn't, but dad showed up to court. He had a certificate showing he went to a parenting class. Hey, I married a new woman. We went Desmond, and to the shock of the caseworkers, the judge gave Desmond back that day. Okay, there you go. So Desmond went back to his dad at about 2.5, 3 in there somewhere. And that seemed to go okay until there was the big fight, which we later found out was um, his bio dad stabbed the stepmom in front of Desmond and and fled. And little Desmond was found alone in the apartment with a cutlet. And back into foster care he goes. And now he's got extra trauma. He's already had all these traumas of the moves because we know every time a child has a move, it's a terrific trauma. Whether it's a good move or a bad, it's
Right.
still a trauma. And so now he's got other trauma, and we don't know what else happened during that time. He was placed with a potential pre-adoptive family, but his behaviors were just off the hook. He's a 3-year-old that can't process that. He can't reason this. He doesn't know. They decided not to adopt him. He went to another foster home. Then he ended up in a, and then ends up eventually with us. But just series of home. And so there were some back and forths. There were some attempts at reunification. Again, just not good, not proper, not thought out. I don't know what it was, but he, all that to say, when he came to us, and he was just 5 when he came to us. Like, he was just tail end of 4 when we were visiting with him. So he went through a lot in a really short time. An utter failure of the system.
Stories like this is the reason why so many people have mixed emotions surrounding adoption.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because he was in the care of his biological father. He was in the hands of a biological parent
Mm-hmm.
who commits a crime and now is deemed unnecessary, unfit to take care of his own child. So when you have people who'll say, no, the child should stay with the family, and to a certain extent, I agree. But then, what family can he be with who's not going to have a relationship with his biological father? Because in a case like that, when the family member has a relationship with the biological father, in a sense, the child is still in the care of the biological parent, who we now know is dangerous. This is the reason why there's so many emotions that surrounds the topic of
Exactly.
adoption.
It's exactly. It's not so cut and dried, right? It's not
Right,
so. I wish everybody could live in the family they deserve to
right.
be in. I wish I could remain right around, and there was not a need for adoption. There was not a need for foster care. There was not a need for, protection for children. But there is, we've generational trauma we're dealing with.
Yeah,
I'm sure in
absolutely.
his family as well. Would there have been some auntie somewhere? Probably. I don't know. But then you've got caseworkers with 92 kids. They
Yeah,
don't have time to search. I mean, it's just like the system. It's broken on every end. And sometimes people just can't properly parent because of either their own mental health, their trauma, whatever it is.
yeah,
I think the intent was there. I think um, his dad wanted to love him. I think his dad did love him. I mean, and his mom maybe did too, but sometimes we just can't do the action of love. And I always have the saying that kids can't be put on a shelf.
yeah,
You
right.
wait till the healing comes because kids grow and they have needs right now. If I could put them in a file drawer and pull it up, they're ready now. Here we go.
And,
That would be great. But kids are growing at an astronomical level. They're developing physically, mentally, cognitively,
yeah,
emotionally, all the ways.
all of
And they
that.
need to sit and they need safety now, not in 3 years, not in 2 years.
Now, when you went into adoption, was your first thought to adopt a non-white child?
No.
No.
And it wasn't to adopt a white child, though, either. I mean, it's really strange. I think at the time when we were ready to adopt, we were just ready. We had gone through, and I will just call it the hell of infertility. Anybody that's gone through it will use the same word. When you get to the other side and you've decided that, okay, I don't think biological is going to work. By then, you are emotionally battered, you're medically battered, all the ways battered. And so at that point, the goal was to become a parent. And so we were, we looked at different programs. At the time, we actually got studied to adopt through the Philippines, which were older children. And then the Philippines program closed. So we were learning how to speak, Tagalog and learning the
Mm,
music and the culture, the foods. And then that program closed.
yeah.
And the Korean program, which had been closed, opened up. And our caseworker who had adopted from Korea just said, I really recommend this program. The kids get great medical care there. That, you know what I mean? So that was sort of the entree. So we sort of switched our cultural learning to home being
Mm,
South Korea. And now we're not a white family. And
mm,
so I will thank that agency forever and ever. They did such a great job of, I know there's not a perfect way to do it, but they really did a great job of training us, of the implications of this. Like, your family now forever, generations from now, is going to be Dutch,
Yeah.
English, Norwegian, Korean. Like it's going to now for like this is your family. This is now your identity. Your
Yeah.
child is not a potted plant that sits in the corner. This is your ingrained family to you, and this is you. So they did a great job of training us. So at that point, like I said, after that, I didn't want to adopt a white child, quite honestly, because I felt like it may cause my granddaughter not feel good about
Right.
herself. And we never did adopt another Asian child. She kind of,
Yeah.
we asked her, "Would you like us to adopt from?" Because the
Yeah.
program's going to open and close, and she says, "No, I think she liked to be the only Asian." I'm good.
She's like, I'm
So
different. No.
yeah,
So,
I think she liked her identity. So
so, so that's what I wanted to know. So when
yeah,
you, as far as
yeah.
culturally, there's a difference.
Oh my goodness,
And as an adoptee yourself, then becoming an adoptive mom of children of different races, ethnicities, what have you,
hmm.
was it important to you for them to know their roots like
Oh
you
my
wanted to know
gosh,
yours?
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
100%, 100%. And even like with the biological, with my kids, and there's people feel different ways. But I, at the time, and I still did, it said basically, if you want to search for your, biological parents, I will help you. I prefer you wait till you're 18,
Good.
only because of what I know I went through emotionally,
Mm.
and all the work I did with that. And when we grow up, and I said, and honestly, preferably 22, because we have a huge developmental growth from
Mhm.
18 to
Yeah.
22, most of us, that we're trying to find our own identity. So, but I said, I will help you. And indeed, I have. I am Facebook friends with probably, I think, almost all of my kids' bio parents.
Oh, good. Oh, that's
And
awesome.
oh, yeah. And, the one son went to Chicago to live with his bio dad, and his bio dad and I
Mhm.
talk. And, you know, it's just like, so again, it's kind of that love multiplies, it doesn't divide. And I
Right.
will meet them and say, welcome to the family. You got a
Yeah.
big bodacious family here. So you're one of, you know what I mean? I welcome your whole
Thank you for that.
family.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Because this is the first I'm hearing of something like this, to know that your adopted child made connections with their biological family and then went back to live with their biological family, and
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
said we are family. There's no
Yeah.
divide. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's too much for a child to carry, to go through life not knowing, and to be like, well, this is mom, but I also know I have another mom and another dad and more brothers and sisters or whatever. Thank
Hmm.
you so
Thank
much
you.
for that. So I want to talk about what birthed Loving Desmond.
Okay. Well, so Desmond, and it's a whole book course, so I'm not talking about it all, but essentially Desmond, through his life, had a whole lot of struggles, as you can understand, a whole lot of what we call trauma behaviors, a whole lot of, basically had a lot of involvement in starting with the juvenile justice program when he was 13 on, um, and just a lot of. It's a very dramatic story.
Yeah.
I think adding to it, what made it way more difficult is we adopted Desmond in 1998, and his adoptive dad, my husband, died in a car accident in 2003 in January. So
Mhm.
Desmond now has this other stunning loss. And I'm a
Yeah.
single mom trying to raise 6 kids,
Yeah.
which, on my own. And Desmond's behaviors were a lot, to the point that he was probably, and how I described it, he was giving 95% of my parenting attention, and the other five kids
Mhm.
were vying for the other 5%. He,
Wow.
lots of needs, always loved, believe me, my heart always loved him. Desmond's behaviors escalated and escalated and escalated. Kind of when he was about 13, they became to the point that he needed greater help than I mean, he was in therapy all the time. Nothing's working, nothing's working. I'm begging for residential care for him. He needed to, his behaviors were not safe in the home, not for us and not for him. And his acting out was really big, and not everything is in the book. We'll say that.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so ultimately, and what was the hardest, worst decision of my entire life. I terminated my parental rights on Desmond in order for him to get the care that he needed because and that was when I tell you this book is raw. This like it. We both are laying our hearts on this table. Through that, I'm really trying to think if there was maybe 2 months that we weren't in contact. At that time, he was actually in a residential treatment in Iowa when this happened, and they were about ready to send him home, and he really hadn't made progress, and I had to really weigh to the other kids what they were going through, what they had gone through, and him coming home, and it was the worst decision. It still is. One of my friends was writing today, and she said it was a lose-lose. And I said that's the first time anybody said that, and it just resonated. There was no win. It was lose. It was lose, and it lobbed a grenade in his life. And I don't know if I will ever forgive myself for it, but I felt like there was no other decision. And I'm looking forward to some feedback from that from some adoptees. But until you've walked in those shoes and gone through the grief. So. But after time went on, Desmond did return home and ended up at age 15 in adult jail for a year. Came home again for a few months, and the judge he violated his probation, and the judge sent him to adult prison at 16. And he's been in and out. This book was really birthed out of, and Desmond says it so well in his introduction. I'm just going to read because he just says it better than I do. And this is a little, and I'm not going to read the whole prologue because he's a stunning writer. He's just stunning.
Amazing.
He's so talented. Like his writing, like I say, I'm a good writer, but Desmond's like a great writer. He is great. And he says, for a while, my mom has been urging me to write a book with her. While I thought it was a good idea, I struggled because most books have happy endings. And he's writing this from prison. He said, I felt it would be impossible to write a book about my life when I'm not in a storybook ending type of place. But Mom, being Mom, wouldn't let this idea slide. The title she wanted was Loving Desmond. What makes this complicated is that for my whole life, I've never really loved myself. He said, we all have life-changing moments. For me, watching that football game, what he refers to earlier, was a profound life-changing moment. I could see a trace of a life I should be in. Maybe the best way to learn how to love myself is to tell my story with my mom, all while my dad is watching from the real big house, right along with God. And Desmond sent me that out of the blue when we were talking about this for a month. And I think I cried for 3 days. And then I wrote back, and then he wrote back, and then I wrote back. And that's how the book was born.
So that was a very good intro. I just want to say, Desmond, good job.
And that's not even the good part of it.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
like
sure.
how it was born. But
I'm sure.
He is phenomenal.
So was it his struggles that was so much different from your other children that made you encourage him to write his story?
I would say so. I mean, honestly, all of my kids have a story. Believe me when I say each and every one of them could write a book probably equally as well. I think there is something about Desmond has a great self-awareness and an ability to self-reflect. And in the talks we would have, the writing we would have back and forth, it was basically like this is a story. Like this has to be put somewhere in as much of an organized way as we could. And the book really turned into not only just chronologically with the story, but the part 2 of the book is really where we're leaning into all the different systems, whether it's child welfare, whether it's education, therapy, juvenile justice. One of the titles is A Boy in a Man's World, Adult Corrections. And all these different systems that you can kind of see the picture where there's an area of growth. And I try to write with a trauma lens. Like this is through trauma. This is what happened, and this is why he's doing. Because anybody that would meet Desmond, like the behaviors don't match,
Yeah.
you know, him to be, and that's
Mm.
trauma. And that's trauma.
I
And
mean, yeah, it's very traumatic, and to know that it started so early,
yeah,
and when we talk about trauma and going through something traumatic,
hmm
maternal separation, biological separation, all of those
yeah,
things, like I said earlier, it's hard to determine, what do I do with this anger? What do I do with this energy?
yeah.
Because the average child does not know that, especially
No,
when you're 5 years old and well, I was with dad, but now I'm not, and now I'm with this person, but now I'm going to go back to dad, and for it to start so early for him, I mean, we have to understand and make room for, what's the word that I'm looking for? Just make room for the understanding that we're supposed to have, because this child did not say, "Oh, when I grow up, I'm going to be a bad boy and I'm just going to get in all the trouble in the world." That's not what kids say.
no, 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 no,
That's not what kids
no.
say.
And his things, I'll just be very honest and transparent. Look him up. People will look him up. It's not like he's an armed robber or raping and murdering. I mean, he is.
We're going to know the
It's
story
theft.
once we get the book.
It's theft. You'll read it when you read the book, but it's. I guess I want to say that, like, I don't feel a huge sense of physical danger, like, you know, Desmond. And he's certainly matured. He just turned 30, and he wrote that little bit, I think, when he was 22, maybe.
A
Um,
lot.
his
Wow.
book has been in motion for a long time,
Yeah.
and it's been a labor of love. And even between Desmond and I, it's been
Yeah.
It sat at 8 pages for quite a few years
Right.
until we got going with it. And it has a very surprise ending, so I'm not going to give it, but there is a big.
Yeah. No, don't give
I
anything
won't
away.
give it away. I
Yeah,
won't give it away. But it is a good
it's a
ending.
story.
It is a good story. It's a good
Yeah.
story.
And that's why it's so important now. I'm realizing at this point in life, no one can tell Jasmine's story like Jasmine. No one can
Mm-hmm.
tell Sarah's story like Sarah. No one can tell Desmond's story like Desmond. And we all have a story. Whether you are an adopted child, an adoptive parent, everyone has a story. And it's so important for us to tell our stories, because we help so many other people by just sharing our
Yes.
story. And because you've chosen to share your story with me on this platform, I am forever grateful to you. And I even hope one day to speak to Desmond.
I hope
Just,
you will. I know you
yeah,
will. I'm going to speak that into the universe. I know you will.
yes, please
Mm-hmm.
do. Please do, because I would love to
Absolutely.
speak to him.
Yes.
So, Sarah, I thank you so much for your time. I really
Thank you,
do.
Jasmine.
Thank you so much for being transparent and sharing your story. And just because your story is going to encourage so many others who are embarrassed by their stories to share their stories. So thank you so much, because we don't realize it, but it's the encouraging aspect that we all need, so that we can take away being judgmental, so we could take away being prideful, arrogant, and so many other things, because
Mm,
our stories are supposed to humble us.
yeah.
I mean, really, if we're being honest, I don't care who you are, we should all live life with a very humbling mentality, because it's going to help so many other people. And I thank you so much. On Instagram, we are loving Desmond Book.
Loving Desmond book. Yes.
And so, and we want to read this book. We want everyone to get this
Yeah.
book and just to understand that not only is this a mother-daughter team, I'm sorry, a mother-son team, but also two adoptees who are sharing their experience.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Sarah, before I let you go, is there anything else that you want to share about your story, about Desmond's story, or do you want us to follow you on Instagram? What else do you want to
Yeah.
say?
Please do follow us on Instagram. Please, we're on Facebook too. On just loving Desmond. Doesn't have the book part. But yeah, it's available on Amazon. And please read it. Please, I would ask that you leave an honest review. I would love to hear the feedback. Um, because I think that this book has always been about to me, making Desmond great. I wanted his words to be the first words in the book and the last book she read.
Yeah.
And this is my love letter with Desmond. So I thank you,
You
Jasmine, so much.
you already have my heart just beating like crazy because
Oh,
I'm going to get my hands on the book. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to come back. I'm going to put it on Instagram, and I'm going to let everyone know my take on the book. And I'm not going to give anything away, but I do want us to encourage supporting each other as adoptees and supporting Desmond and his mom, Sarah, and just buy the book, read it, and let's talk about it. So, Sarah, I
great.
thank you
So that's right.
too.
Sounds good. Sounds good.